December 8th, 1963. The phone rang at Frank Sinatra's mansion. An unfamiliar voice said, "We have your son. You have 48 hours to get $240,000 in cash, or you'll never see him again." Frank Sinatra was at a party when the call came. Not a big party, just a quiet evening with some friends at his compound in Palm Springs. Music was playing softly. People were drinking, talking, laughing. It was supposed to be a relaxing Sunday night. Then his private line rang. The number only family and close associates knew. Frank's assistant answered. She listened for a moment, her face going pale. Then she looked across the room at Frank and said quietly, "Mr. Sinatra, you need to take this call now." Frank set down his drink and walked to the phone. "This is Frank Sinatra." The voice on the other end was cold, mechanical, clearly disguised. "Mr. Sinatra, we have your son, Frank Jr. He's alive and unharmed. For now. But if you want him to stay that way, you need to listen very carefully." Frank's entire body went rigid. His son. They had his son. "What do you want?" $240,000. Cash. Small bills. "You have 48 hours to get the money together. We'll call you back with instructions on where to deliver it. If you contact the police or the FBI, your son dies. If you try anything clever, your son dies. If you don't have the money ready when we call back, your son dies. Do you understand?" "I understand. But I need to know he's okay. Let me talk to him." There was a pause, muffled voices in the background. Then a different voice came on the line. Younger, frightened, but definitely Frank Jr.'s voice. "Dad? Junior, are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay, Dad. I'm scared, but I'm okay. They said if you—" The line went dead. The kidnappers had hung up. Frank stood there holding the phone, his hand shaking. Around him, the party had gone completely silent. Everyone was staring at him, waiting. "They took Junior," Frank said quietly. "Someone kidnapped my son." The room erupted. People started talking at once, asking questions, offering help, suggesting what to do, but Frank barely heard them. His mind was racing. Who would do this? Why? And most importantly, how was he going to get his son back? December 8th, 1963. 2 weeks after President Kennedy's assassination, the country was still reeling from that tragedy, and now Frank Sinatra was facing his own nightmare. Frank Jr., Frankie, as his family called him, was 19 years old. He was trying to build a career as a singer, following in his father's footsteps. On December 8th, he'd been performing at Harrah's Club in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. After his show, he'd gone back to his hotel room to rest before his next performance. That's when they'd taken him. 3 men had knocked on his door. When Frankie opened it, they'd forced their way in. One had a gun. They'd tied up Frankie's friend who was with him, then blindfolded Frankie and taken him out
through a back entrance. They'd put him in a car and driven away. And now they were demanding $240,000, a fortune in 1963, for his safe return. Frank's first instinct was to call the police, but the kidnappers had been clear. No police, no FBI, or Junior dies. And Frank believed them. He dealt with dangerous people before. He knew what they were capable of. If these men said they'd kill his son, they meant it. But Frank also knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, professional help, the kind of help that wouldn't get his son killed. He made a decision. He was going to call the FBI, but not officially, not in a way that would alert the kidnappers. He was going to ask for their help quietly, carefully, in a way that gave him the best chance of getting Junior back alive. Within an hour, FBI agents arrived at Frank's house. They came in unmarked cars. They wore civilian clothes. They were discreet, professional, and absolutely focused on one thing: getting Frank Sinatra Jr. back safely. The lead agent, a man named Dean Elson, sat down with Frank. "Mr. Sinatra, I understand your concern about involving law enforcement, but I need you to trust us. We've handled kidnapping cases before. We know how to do this without getting your son killed." "How many of those cases ended with the victim coming home alive?" Frank asked bluntly. Agent Elson paused. "Most of them. Not all, but most. Most isn't good enough. That's my son, my only son. I'm not taking any chances." "Then let us do our job, Mr. Sinatra. We'll work with you, not against you, but we need you to follow our lead." Frank looked at the agent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fine, but if anything happens to Junior, anything at all, I'm done listening to you. I'll handle it my way." "Understood." The FBI immediately began setting up. They installed recording equipment on Frank's phone lines. They stationed agents around his property. They started investigating, trying to figure out who had taken Frankie and where they might be holding him. But Frank wasn't content to just sit and wait. He knew people, dangerous people, people who owed him favors, kidnappers, and he started making calls. One of those calls was to Sam Giancana. Sam was a Chicago mob boss, one of the most powerful organized crime figures in America. He and Frank had a complicated relationship. They'd been friends once. Recently, things had cooled between them, but Frank knew that Sam had resources the FBI didn't. Connections. People who could find out things that law enforcement couldn't. Sam, I need your help, Frank said when Sam answered. I heard about Junior. That's rough, Frank. You got any idea who did it? No, that's why I'm calling you. Can you ask around? See if anyone in your circles knows anything? There was a pause. Frank, you know I'd help you if I could, but kidnapping? That's not our thing. That's amateur hour. None of the families would touch something like this. Too much heat, too much risk. This is probably some idiots looking for a quick score. Can you still ask around? Yeah, I'll ask, but don't get your hopes up. This doesn't smell like professional work. Sam was right. As the FBI investigation progressed, it became clear that the kidnappers weren't professionals. They were making mistakes. Small mistakes, but mistakes nonetheless, and that made them more dangerous, not less. Professional criminals followed rules. They understood the game. Amateurs were unpredictable. They panicked. They made rash decisions, and Frank's son's life was in the hands of amateurs. The kidnappers called back 24 hours later. Same disguised voice, same cold, mechanical tone. Do you have the money, Mr. Sinatra? I'm getting it. I need more time. $240,000 in cash isn't easy to pull together. You're Frank Sinatra. You've got millions. In banks, in investments, not sitting in my house in cash. Give me another 24 hours. There was a pause. Muffled discussion in the background. Then, fine, 24 hours. But that's it. We call back tomorrow night. You better have the money ready. I will. Can I talk to my son? I need to know he's still okay. He's fine. I need to hear his voice. Another pause. Then Junior came on the line. Dad? Frankie, are you hurt? Have they hurt you? No, I'm okay. I'm blindfolded. I don't know where I am, but I'm okay. Hang in there, son. I'm going to get you out of this. I promise. I know, Dad. The line went dead again. Frank slammed the phone down in frustration. Damn it. Why won't they let me talk to him longer? Agent Elson, who'd been listening on the recording equipment, spoke up. Because they don't want us to get information. The longer he talks, the more details he might give us. Location, background sounds, anything that could help us find him. Did you get anything from that call? We're analyzing it now. But Mr. Sinatra, I need you to be prepared for something. When they call back with instructions for the money drop, they're going to tell you to come alone. They're going to forbid you from bringing law enforcement. And we need you to ignore that. Absolutely not. If they see FBI agents, they'll kill him. If you go alone, they might kill you both. These people are desperate. Once they have the money, you and your son become witnesses. Loose ends. We can't let you walk into that situation unprotected. Frank shook his head. I'm not risking Junior's life. I'll do exactly what they say. Mr. Sinatra, this conversation is over, Agent. My son, my decision. For the next 24 hours, Frank barely slept. He paced. He drank. More than usual even for him. He chain-smoked. He made phone calls to everyone he could think of who might have information. And he waited. The money was ready. Frank had liquidated assets, pulled cash from multiple banks, borrowed from friends. $240,000 in small bills, packed into a black leather bag. It sat on his dining room table like a bomb, waiting to explode. When the phone finally rang again, Frank grabbed it before the first ring finished. I have the money. Tell me where to bring it. The voice gave him instructions. Specific, detailed instructions. A location in Los Angeles. A time, 2 a.m. Come alone. No police. No FBI. No tricks. Frank wrote it all down. When the call ended, Agent Elson immediately started planning. We'll have agents positioned around the drop site. Unmarked vehicles. Surveillance from a distance. They won't see us, but we'll be there. No, Frank said firmly. I'm going alone. Exactly like they said. Mr. Sinatra, that's suicide. That's my son's life. And I'm not putting it at risk because the FBI wants to play hero. You follow me, I'll know, and I'll abort the whole thing. Do you understand? Agent Elson looked at Frank for a long moment. He saw something in Frank's eyes. A father's desperation, yes, but also something harder. A certainty. A willingness to do whatever it took. All right, the agent said finally. But you'll wear a wire. Audio only. So if something goes wrong, we'll at least know where to find you. Frank agreed to that. At 1:30 a.m., Frank Sinatra got into his car. The black bag full of money sat on the passenger seat. A small recording device was taped to his chest under his shirt, and he drove toward Los Angeles, toward the drop site, toward whatever waited for him there. He thought about Junior the whole drive. Remembered teaching him to sing when he was just a kid. Remembered Junior's first performance, how nervous he'd been, how Frank had told him, just be yourself, that's all you need to do. And now Junior was blindfolded somewhere, terrified, waiting for his father to save him. And
Frank was going to do exactly that, no matter what it cost. The drop site was a gas station, closed at this hour, dark and empty. Frank pulled in, turned off his engine, and waited. The bag of money sat on his lap now. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. A car pulled up behind him, headlights off, engine idling. A figure got out, wearing a mask, holding what looked like a gun, and walked toward Frank's car. Frank rolled down his window. "The money," the masked figure said, voice still disguised, mechanical. Frank held up the bag. "Not until I see my son. That's not how this works. You give us the money, we give you a location where he is. No, I see him first or no money." There was a tense pause. The masked figure seemed to be considering. Then he pulled out a walkie-talkie and spoke into it. A moment later, another car pulled up. The back door opened, and someone was pushed out, blindfolded, hands tied, stumbling. "Junior!" Frank threw open his car door and started toward his son. "Stop!" the masked figure shouted, raising the gun. "Give me the money first!" Frank stopped. His son was right there, just 20 feet away, so close, but Frank couldn't reach him. Without risking everything, slowly, Frank held out the bag. The masked figure grabbed it, checked inside quickly, then nodded to his accomplice. "He's all yours." Then they ran back to their cars and drove away, fast, disappearing into the night with $240,000 of Frank Sinatra's money. Frank didn't care. He ran to his son, pulled off the blindfold, untied his hands. "Frankie, are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Junior was crying. "Dad, I was so scared. I thought. It's over. You're safe now. It's over." They held each other there in that dark parking lot for a long moment, father and son, both crying now, both safe. Then Frank remembered the wire he was wearing. The FBI was listening, and they'd heard everything, including the fact that the kidnappers had gotten away with the money. Within minutes, FBI vehicles surrounded the gas station. Agent Elson approached Frank and Junior. "Mr. Sinatra, is your son hurt?" "He's fine, just scared. We need to get him to a hospital, get him checked out, and we need to debrief him while his memory is fresh." Junior spent the next several hours at a hospital being examined and then being interviewed by FBI agents. He told them everything he could remember. The men had worn masks the entire time. He'd never seen their faces, but he'd heard their voices, and he'd picked up on certain details. One of them had mentioned Lake Tahoe. That's how they knew where to grab him. Another had talked about needing money to pay off debts. The FBI worked fast. They tracked the ransom money. Frank had recorded the serial numbers of the bills before handing them over. When the kidnappers started spending the money, the FBI traced it back to them. 3 days later, they arrested 3 men, Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin, all in their early 20s, all amateurs. Keenan had been a high school classmate of Nancy Sinatra, Frank's daughter. He'd fallen on hard times financially and had come up with the kidnapping scheme as a desperate way to get money. They'd planned it poorly. They'd made mistakes at every step, and now they were facing kidnapping charges, federal crimes that carried potential death sentences. When Frank heard they'd been caught, he felt a mixture of relief and rage. Relief that it was over. Rage at the men who'd terrorized his son and his family. But there was something else too, something unexpected. When Frank learned that Barry Keenan had known his daughter, that he'd been a regular kid who'd made a catastrophic mistake out of desperation, Frank felt something almost like pity. Almost. The trial took place in 1964. It became a media sensation. Frank Sinatra testified, describing the phone calls, the ransom demand, the terrifying days waiting to get his son back. Junior testified too, describing his ordeal, the blindfold, the fear, not knowing if he'd ever see his family again. The defense tried to argue that it hadn't been a real kidnapping, that Junior had been in on it, that it
was a publicity stunt to boost his singing career. The prosecution destroyed that argument. The evidence was overwhelming. The kidnappers had acted alone. Junior was a victim, not a participant. All 3 men were convicted. They received long prison sentences, though not the death penalty, and Frank got his money back, most of it anyway. The FBI recovered most of the ransom, but the real question, the question that haunted Frank for years afterward, was different. It wasn't about the money or the trial or even the kidnappers themselves. The question was, had Frank made the right choice? By calling the FBI, by cooperating with law enforcement, Frank had broken the kidnappers' primary rule. They'd said, no police or the boy dies, and Frank had ignored that. He brought in the FBI from the very beginning. What if the kidnappers had found out? What if they'd realized FBI agents were listening to the phone calls, tracking the investigation, surrounding the drop site? Would they have killed Junior out of spite, out of panic? Frank had gambled with his son's life. He trusted the FBI to be discreet enough, professional enough, skilled enough
to stay hidden. And he'd been right. They had stayed hidden. The kidnappers never knew. But what if Frank had been wrong? In the months after the kidnapping, Frank and Junior's relationship changed. They'd always been close, but now there was something deeper, a shared trauma, a bond forged in terror and relief. Junior continued his singing career. He performed, he recorded albums, he toured, and Frank supported him every step of the way. Sometimes they even performed together, father and son on the same stage, singing the same songs. But Junior was always aware of the shadow that hung over him. He was Frank Sinatra's son, and that made him a target, not just for kidnappers, but for people who wanted to use him, manipulate him, get close to his father through him. He learned to be careful, cautious, suspicious of people's motives. And Frank learned something too. He learned that all his money, all his fame, all his connections to powerful people, none of it could protect the people he loved. Not really. His son had been taken from a hotel room in broad daylight by 3 amateurs with a gun and a plan, and Frank had been powerless to stop it. That knowledge changed him, made him more protective, more paranoid. He hired security for his family. He became suspicious of strangers who got too close. He second-guessed every decision that might put his loved ones at risk. Years later, in an interview, Junior was asked about the kidnapping. "Do you blame your father for what happened? For being famous? For making you a target?" Junior shook his head. "No, I never blamed him. It wasn't his fault that some desperate men decided to use me to get to him. If anything, I'm grateful, because when it mattered most, when my life was on the line, my father did everything right. He got me back, and that's all that matters."
But Frank blamed himself. Even though it wasn't his fault, even though he'd done everything he could, he still blamed himself for putting his son in that position simply by being who he was. In 1998, just before Frank died, Junior visited him. They talked about old times, about music, about family, and finally, Junior brought up the kidnapping. "Dad, I need to tell you something I never said back then." "What is it?" "When I was blindfolded, sitting in that room, not knowing if I'd ever see you again, I wasn't thinking about being scared. I mean, I was scared, but that's not what I was thinking about most." "What were you thinking about?" "I was thinking about you, about how you must be feeling, about how much worse this must be for you than for me, because I absolutely knew that you would do anything to get me back, that you'd pay any amount of money, take any risk, make any sacrifice, and I just kept thinking, hold on, Dad's coming, Dad will fix this, and you did." Frank's eyes filled with tears. "I almost didn't, Junior. I almost made the wrong call. If I'd handled things differently, if the FBI had been spotted, if the kidnappers had panicked, but they didn't. You made the right call. You trusted the right people, and you got me back. That's what matters." Frank nodded slowly. "I'm glad you see it that way, because I've spent 35 years second-guessing every decision I made that night." "Well, stop. You saved my life, Dad, and I'll never forget that." They sat together for a while after that, not talking, just being together, father and son, 2 people who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side stronger. December 8, 1963. The phone rang at Frank Sinatra's mansion. An unfamiliar voice said, "We have your son." And Frank Sinatra did what any father would do. He fought to get his son back. He used every resource he had, his money, his connections, his intelligence, his courage. He worked with the FBI even though it terrified him. He risked his own life at the ransom drop even though he knew it might be a trap. And he won. He got his son back. But the victory came with a cost. The fear, the trauma, the knowledge that fame and fortune couldn't protect the people you loved. That lesson stayed with Frank for the rest of his life. And when Frank Sinatra died in 1998, Frank Sinatra Jr. was there, holding his father's hand. The boy who'd been kidnapped 35 years earlier, now a grown man, saying goodbye to the father who'd saved him. "Thank you, Dad," Junior whispered, "for everything, but especially for that night, for not giving up on me, for bringing me home." Frank couldn't respond. He was too weak, too close to the end, but he squeezed Junior's hand, and in that squeeze was everything that needed to be said. "I saved you. You saved me. We saved each other." The kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. ended with arrests, a trial, justice, but it also ended with something more important. A father and son who knew, beyond any doubt, that they would do anything for each other. That when it mattered most, when everything was on the line, they could count on each other. Absolutely. That's the real story. Not the ransom or the FBI or the dramatic rescue, but the bond between a father and son, tested in the worst
possible way and emerging stronger than ever. December 8, 1963, the day Frank Sinatra's son was taken, and the day Frank Sinatra proved that being a father mattered more than being a legend.